I had a chance to dialogue with him for 8 hours. It was he, myself, my oldest daughter, and an actor that they wanted to put with us because they were filming all this for this documentary I was a part of. Well, anyway, I'm sitting there. Here's the greatest physicist in the world, supposedly, and I've got all these questions about, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and all this, and I can't wait to talk to him during the breaks. And I start to talk to him, and he wants to talk to me about God. So I know when to change my plan. I said, okay, tell me, what are your thoughts on God? He said, one thing, he did not believe in faith. He said, I'm a scientist. He says, I believe in reality. So I say, do you believe in God? He says, no, I don't believe in faith. I know there's a God. I have firsthand knowledge. I see him every day. He said, I pray to him all the time. I try to pray to him continually. I said, what do you pray? He said, I just thank him. Now, this is a happy scientist. You don't meet too many of them. It's like a happy psychiatrist. I actually met one of them. And but this guy is just so full of joy. He said, I just thank him all the time. Whoever, the one who gave us all this is so good, loves us so much. He said, I don't think I can thank him enough. This is the key to the Lord's presence. We enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. You want to abide in the presence of the Lord, be a thankful person instead of a complaining person. That's one of the easiest ways to lose track with the Lord. That's why Israel was not allowed to enter the promised land, because they're grumbling and complaining. But anyway, I said, okay, well, who are you praying to? He says, I don't know. I said, would you like to know? He says, not really. I see enough. So anyway, we started this dialogue. We've been emailing back and forth, sometimes several times a day. We've kept up this relationship, but I really love this guy. But I love science. I'm a crazy, I love science. Now, I think a lot of it is off track. A lot of it is wacky. There's a lot of pseudoscience. There's a lot of that's more political than science. But, the Lord said the things that were made reveal him. And this second law of thermodynamics actually proves there is a God. Now, I've never had a scientist refute this. Okay, here's the basis of the second law of thermodynamics. It's called the law of entropy. It basically says everything in existence is moving towards disorder and not order. Everything, unless it is acted upon by an outside intelligent source. There has been no observed order in the universe that was not the result of an outside action by an intelligent source. Now think about that. They have never observed anything in nature that is moving towards synthesis of order. If it moves towards one another, it's moving towards chaos, conflict, breakdown. This is why when you build a brand new house, it starts to deteriorate right away. You buy a new car, it starts going down. Guess what? These bodies are moving towards disorder. Everything in nature, unless acted upon by an outside intelligent source. So they said they have never observed once anything come together to create order synthesis. Now, the whole theory of evolution is there were millions, literally millions, of random accidents that brought forth order. When in science they have never yet observed one. Think of that. They said just the odds of one of these random accidents happening would be the equivalent of going to Las Vegas and rolling the dice 7 million times and getting 7 every time. They said, well, odds are actually better that you could do that. Well, you say, well, get loaded dice, we can do that. Well, that's being acted upon by an outside intelligent source. Do you understand what I'm saying? They said there are better odds for a tornado to hit a junkyard and leave behind a perfectly built Boeing 747 jet with all the instruments, fuel in the tanks, everything, than even one of these accidents happening. And yet the theory of evolution is based on literally millions of these accidents happening in perfect timing, totally by random. Okay, do you get it? I mean, it's foolishness. It's, to me, the deep darkness that is spoken of in Isaiah 60. Okay, so what's that got to do with us? Well, I think it has the same thing to do with our spiritual lives. You know you've got to be intentional about your spiritual life. It's not going to, by itself, by its own, going to work towards synthesis, harmony, maturity, all these things. We have to be intentional about it. We have to want to do it. I don't believe the Lord's going to force anything on us. He will help us. He sent the helper to help us, but his name is helper, not doer. He will do his part if we do our part. But if we don't want to do our part, he's not going to do it. And I think we have to be very intentional about everything that we want true order to come from. And you know, he gave us these minds. We need them renewed, but I believe we're supposed to renew them to use them. So, if you want to get spiritual, stay spiritual, walk in maturity, have order in your life, you're going to have to be engaged in it. Now, we're supposed to become like the Lord, right? And aren't we all here because of his awesome plan? Christians should be the best planners ever. If we know the Creator, Christians should be, that should be fundamental to us if we know how to plan. And we don't want to plan in the flesh or according to our carnal nature. We want to do it with the Lord. But we do need to do this. If you don't have a plan for your life, it's going to tend towards chaos and disorder. But if you have a plan and you're engaged in it, I'm talking about a plan for our maturity, a plan for study, a plan for, how we're going to progress, for knowing our calling, knowing our purpose in the Lord. Every one of us, it says, we were created before the foundation of the world. He knew us before the foundation of the world. Now, I believe he knew who we were going to be. He had a plan for us. But, many are called, but few are chosen. Few go on to make their calling and election sure. Now, I spent several years doing this, asking conferences of thousands of people. And, conference people are the hungriest of the hungry. These are the ones after God. Asking, I don't know how many I did this in. How many of you know your calling in the Lord, your purpose? And usually it was 5% or less. Most we ever had was maybe 10% of the hungriest of the hungry. Let me ask you this. How well would you be doing if only 10% of your body was functioning? That's the state of the body of Christ. People do, how can you be walking your calling, being prepared for it if you don't even know what it is? Well, the Lord never told me. Well, you never sought it. You hear all the time, well, I prayed a prayer. I prayed that a long time. That's not seeking. That's part of seeking. But you've got to seek so as to find. I hear people all the time saying, I'm open for the Lord to use me any way He wants. Well, guess what? You will never get used. If you're just open, if you don't care more than that, He said, earnestly desire spiritual gifts, especially prophecy. If you don't care enough to earnestly desire, to seek them, let the Lord speak to you. Keep asking until He does speak. And then pursue it. There's a big difference between the calling of God and the commission of God. We've discussed that. Paul was called as an apostle many years before he was commissioned as an apostle. And a lot of people confuse the two. They hear the calling, they think, I'm an apostle. And that's why we have almost everybody in the world now calling themselves an apostle. But we're called to rule in this life. We're called to be in control. Now, one of the things we discussed on a previous meeting, now let me just share this. I'm going to really dig down into this tonight. I've got a message tonight I've never preached before, but I'm going to really dig down on some of this, okay? But in a very practical way. But what were the four main purposes of God? Any of you remember that? Any of you remember three? Two. Purposes, I said that wrong. Purposes of man. What are the four main reasons God created men? Okay, I can't hear you. It's kind of all melted. I'll share them with you, okay? It's just four. They're simple. Number one, fellowship with God. We were created. He created us for His pleasure. Guess what? You're never going to have pleasure. You're never going to have fulfillment until your life is bringing pleasure to God. Main reason you were created, but it's fellowship. He had a special relationship He wanted with man. All right? And the main thing is to keep the main thing. So that's the main thing we always want to keep. Second main purpose of man, we see in Genesis, cultivate the garden. It's interesting to me that offering. Listen, I've never heard that before. Why don't you just tell them, give us all of your money and then go to work and make some more so you can give us more. Let's keep it simple. But that was good. I really like that because he's touching on something really essential. Psychologists have determined that any human being or every human being will go insane if they're deprived of meaningful labor. Guess what? We were created to work. Man was created to cultivate the garden. He was put in there to cultivate it. A lot of people think work is part of the fall, the curse. But that's not the curse. The curse was toil, which is to only work with great and painful effort. But every one of us were created to accomplish something. And if we're not engaged in that productive accomplishing something, we will go insane. I think one of the reasons for the insanity that you see rising in our country today is the unemployment. And it's interesting to me, our federal government, according to their statistics, which I've never seen a government lie more brazenly than ours has been lying to us. And we have over 90 million employable Americans out of work right now. 90 million. Now, the only ones they count, they took major factors out of their statistics, so it looked like they're going down, but they're not. We've got almost a third of our people not working. And they don't know what to do with their time, anything else. I think it's a great harvest. Let's go harvest. Let's get them engaged. But backing up from that, we've got to be engaged. But we're told to cultivate our hearts. Psalm 37, other place. Are we engaged in cultivating? Cultivating isn't just throwing a bunch of seed out. You got to prepare the soil. You've got to water it, get it ready for the seed. You got to know when to plant the seed. Then you got to water the seed and watch over it. According to the Lord, these are the good and faithful servants who, the good soil that produce the fruit. They fight off the enemy that comes to snatch the seed. They're vigilant to watch over this, and this was a part of what God called man to do. But we're supposed to be cultivating our spiritual lives. These are basics to being a disciple. As I shared last night, I believe there's roughly around 8% of Christians that are disciples. I believe that because of a revelation that I felt was confirmed. But we can change that quick. We can get on board and we can become disciples. I'm going to touch on a few of those requirements for disciples tonight that Jesus gave us. These are some of the basics, but we need to go back to these if we're going to bear fruit and be trusted with the real high level stuff. Okay? So we got to be intentional about cultivating our garden. I remember hearing the story of a farmer that took his pastor home for Sunday lunch after the service. And the farmer was, while they're waiting for the dinner to get ready, he was on the front porch with the pastor pointing out all of his great cornfields, and he was so proud of them. He said, just look at that corn. And the pastor said, you didn't grow that corn. God did. The farmer looked at him kind of funny. He said, you're right, but I helped. He said, let me show you the field I let God do all by himself. Random. If you say this is a cornfield and you don't cultivate it, you don't plan this out, you don't work it, what is going to come up? Weeds, briars, thorns. And we've got to be the same about our heart, about our lives. We've got to be intentional about this. Cultivation is part of what we're given to do. It's work. And actually, we'll never have fulfillment and peace in our life until we're engaged in what we've been called to do. Then, of course, third reason man was created, bear fruit and multiply. And not just bear fruit, but do it big. Multiply. How many of you have a vision for an insignificant life? There's something in all of us that just wants to do it big. That is something God put in us. Ambition is not wrong. Selfish ambition is wrong. God gave us that nature. Let's do it and do it big. Of course, the fourth main reason man was created was to take dominion. Here's your garden. Watch over it. It's your responsibility. And let me tell you this thing too. This is totally free, not a part of the message. I was a part, I think I told you guys about that documentary. My daughter and I spent a year filming with all these, it was on climate change. I was the only climate change skeptic in the whole thing. And one of the reasons they kept having me meet with all these scientists, they wanted to convert me. And I kept unraveling their arguments. Because I know weather, I know climate, I was a pilot, I'm still a pilot, but a professional for many years. And anyway, I had real issues with this, but I wanted to know the truth. I went into it wide open. If this is true, I want to know it. And I tried to be as open as I possibly could, but honestly, I didn't find much convincing on that argument. But I love science, I love the creation, and I do think we're destroying the earth. Okay, I may have told you about when I was at the premiere of that thing. Did I tell you about what happened there? Okay, poor memories, I understand. But it's one of the things I miss the most about my youth was having a memory. But anyway, I'm at this premiere. It's in New York at this big deal. There's about 500 people there. All of them are Hollywood people or the most liberal financiers and everything. My daughter and I are probably the only Christians in the room. And I figure because I've gone through this whole year and I frustrated all of them, they've thrown their biggest guns at me and didn't convince me. So I'm figured they don't want to see me coming. And it was the opposite. I come in the door, one of the producers grabbed me and said, "Come here, will you take pictures with my family and me?" And it was just, it was like they made my daughter and I the star. And I didn't realize it, but they had all the top Hollywood stars. They had Harrison Ford and Matt Damon and Jessica Alba, all these people. And our segment about my daughter and I was the most popular one of the entire thing. And but I didn't know that at the time. I figured it's bad, but because they didn't convert me. But I still believe we're doing bad things to the earth. Okay, so I'm standing there in this premiere. During the premiere and the party afterwards, this huge room, all these people, and I'm talking to a lady, you'd probably know who she is if I mentioned her, and a whole group of women from the Sierra Club, okay? And they're all around, and I just quote this scripture to them. And power went out. I hadn't felt power like that in the church in decades. I felt a wave of power go out, and this one lady jumps backward and screams. She goes, "That almost knocked me down." And this woman from Sierra Club said, "That almost knocked me down the stairs." And I turned around and looked at everybody in the room staring at us. They felt it. And then I was the last one to leave the room that night. From people just wanting to talk, and guess what? They were so appreciative of a Christian being willing to do this and investigate all this and at least be a part of the dialogue. But I felt like all kinds of seeds were sown. I felt an incredible anointing talking to these people. Some of them have stayed in touch with me. And anyway, it was like friends, family. We really bonded over the period of doing this thing, even though we're from opposite worlds in a lot of ways. But I went home to my hotel. It was a UN hotel. And I went home and I said, "Lord, what was that? I didn't think you'd go to something like that." My judgment, my critical spirit. I said, "Lord, I didn't think you'd go to a place like that." He said, "You were with my friends tonight." I said, "Lord, those people don't even know you." And he said, "Yeah, but friends love the same things. And they love something that is very dear to me that not many of my people pay attention to." He said, "I so love the world." He said, "I've come to redeem the world." And now the scripture I quoted to these guys was, Revelation 11, he will destroy those who destroy the earth. That is not a good thing. We're destroying the earth today. Now, I believe climate change is a ruse. I've got abundance of evidence on that. Convinced myself, I did as much investigation as possibly could, and I believe that's a distraction, but it's got our eyes off the ball of what's really hurting the earth, what's really destroying the earth. And I think God's people got to take up that mandate again. It was the original command to man, first command, take care of this garden I gave you. Okay, and I think we need to be leading in that, and if we're not, you're going to continue to have all the foolishness that's going on. That's just a sidebar, but I think it's an important issue. I wonder, if we're going to be friends with God, we got to love the same things. Got to be committed to the same things. He loves this earth. He may love us more than sparrows, but he loves every sparrow. He loves them so much, he knows when a single one falls to the ground. And so I think we need to take that. But I believe the degree to which we're accomplishing these 4 things are crucial to us fulfilling our purpose for being here. Every one of us has a garden. Okay, I thought we'd gone over this before, but you may be a whole group of new people. All of you are shaking your heads. But anyway, even if you've heard it before, please bear with me just a minute to touch on these. God has not only called us to do these 4 same things, that's still our mandate while we were created and put on the earth, but we've got to apply them personally. Now, you have a garden. It's been assigned to you by God. It's a domain, a realm of your spiritual authority where you have authority. I believe it is basically wherever you are. There are a number of scriptures that identify our garden that we're supposed to be cultivating. One of them is we cultivate our own heart. We watch over our heart. We cultivate it. We're intentional about what gets sown into it, keeping the weeds, and that's something we've got to do. Our families is obviously another realm where we have to, sow seeds into our family, water those seeds, keep the, birds of the air out, keep the attacks of the enemy out of our family, do all of these things for our kids to bear fruit, for us to bear fruit. But I think we also need to understand wherever God has us, He's probably wanting to give us dominion. You can be taking spiritual dominion over your office. If He's got you there for a reason, it's not just to make a few bucks. We got to start seeing beyond these things. If you work in a warehouse, a janitor could be the spiritual head over a corporation. And could be taking authority over that place. Now, there's a lot of things we add to teach, help people identify their garden, but basically it's where you are. I know people who've taken dominion over the grocery store they shop in. They say, that's my store. I am going to take dominion there. When they go in, they take seeds to sow into the workers or people they meet. They water seeds they've already sown. They get upset if the enemy has started making inroads. They start taking spiritual dominion over it. I think there are housewives who've start taking dominion over their neighborhoods. They take it personally when any of their neighbors' kids get into trouble or accidents or something. But they become pastors, shepherds. Whether these people know the Lord or not. But these people get in trouble, who are they going to come to? The pastor. President of the corporation has problems, he'll go talk to that janitor. You can start taking spiritual dominion and authority. Now, a lot of other ways we need to identify where's the realm God's given to us and where can we cultivate. That's where you're going to bear fruit. That's where you can multiply the fruit. But none of it will work if we don't walk in our garden daily with the Lord. So I shared last night, I think, about how my study of the great heroes of the faith, there were only 4 who were Levites. Yeah, that's right. All the rest were, farmers, merchants, they were soldiers, almost anything but a priest. I do think what we consider full-time ministry can be the hardest place in the world to get to know the Lord. Paul said, let everything you do be done as unto the Lord. Everything we do should be worship. You should be worshiping as hard Monday morning as you are Sunday morning. Doing your work with all of your heart as unto the Lord, because you're not working for that guy who signed your checks, you're working for the Lord. You do that, you will rise to the top. You start turning that all into worship. You start taking dominion, and pretty soon people recognize when they come into the room, a peace comes. You don't get caught up in all the office conflicts and stuff. You see them for what they are. You take dominion over them. Yeah, you understand? And this is where we really become Christians. Wasn't most of Jesus' ministry done in everyday life? Guess what? It still is. I get bored with the miracles in church. I mean, we have those all the time. Now, I appreciate God touching people all the time. But what really excites me is when I hear our people out there and stuff happening. I said, now we're getting somewhere. Now we're becoming what we're called to be. Because doesn't it say, we're not going to get there without the proper functioning of each individual part in Ephesians 4? There's no time in what we call church today for every part to function. All of you didn't have time to get up here and share something, and it isn't going to work in what we consider church today. But what we consider church today is just a gathering where there's certain things we need to do together. There's a corporate worship and presence of the Lord. There's corporate feeding. There's corporate teaching, training. A lot of things that go on like that. But the real work gets done in the real world every day. What are we doing? And there, everybody can function. I know decades ago, this guy, a friend of ours, he's an African king. He came over, he's a real prophetic guy. And he came to visit, and he gave us a word. He said, the Lord's called you to raise up industrial prophets. I thought it was some kind of cleanser. But we really got it right away. He's called us to raise up prophets to corporations, to industries, to governments. And since then, it's been happening. And where their gift functions more there than it ever will in what we look at as church. You get what I'm saying here? And this is where we've got to do it. But just one little key. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be. Where you're investing a lot of attention probably is something related to your calling. And living waters flow out of the innermost being. If someone just has compassion for those who are sick or afflicted, they probably are called to a healing ministry. You know what I'm saying? There's something, if we can get in touch with the deepest issues of our heart, which honestly very few people can, but if you can, you're going to find something connected to who God created you to be and where you're created to have authority. I know school teachers that start taking dominion over their classes. One of them, a science teacher. They keep growing in vision. Now their vision is not only, they went from that to taking over the school, then the school district. Now it's, I'm going to take dominion over science. All of it. I said, just go for it. It needs it. True science and true Christianity should be best friends, by the way. And true scientists and true Christians should have the most wonderful dialogue. But there's a lot of pseudo-Christians, a lot of pseudo-scientists. But find your domain. I'm going to give you a few more practical things we got to do, but I'll do that tonight, okay? All right. Now, I talked about last night the 5 levels of relationship. Believer, great start, but it's just a start. Disciple, talk about that a little more tonight. Servant, friend, and son. What the Lord shared with me, he said, labor's cheap. I keep wrestling with him. Even recently, I just finished what I think is going to be a pretty good book. I was so excited about it. And I realized I'd really missed some opportunities to meet with the Lord when I was working so hard on that book. I kind of zoned out. And I got to learn to do both. I'm struggling through all this like most of us are. We're all growing, maturing, but I've been so works-oriented. Now listen, It's the same thing as being works-oriented for our righteousness. I'm a type A. I've built some things. And I love building things. I love accomplishing things. And I get great satisfaction out of finishing something. Getting it done. And just finishing that book, that was great. And give me another one. But Lord keeps telling me, it's not what you do, it's what you become that is the most important. And I can get so oriented towards doing something for God, I get irritated with his people who are interrupting me when they're the ones I'm doing it for. You know what I'm saying? More important than what we do is what we become. And it's more important, far more useful to have authority with God than with men. Anyone here could have more authority with God than most of the Christian leadership that you know of. In fact, I think some of those who are the most well-known on earth are probably the least well-known in heaven. And some of those who are not known at all on earth can be very well-known in heaven. And they're the real authority. They're the ones really accomplishing what other people get the credit for. You know what I'm saying? That having authority with God can change nations, can change our communities, our families, our churches. We can have that kind of dominion. But true spiritual authority is connected to love. When Jesus felt compassion for the sheep, he became their shepherd. When he felt compassion for those who were in darkness, he became their teacher. You're never going to be given spiritual authority over something you're critical of and judgmental of and critical. If you're always talking bad about your city, you'll never be given spiritual authority over that city. You've got to love your city. Doesn't mean that we overlook its flaws and problems and everything else, but there's a difference when you're seeing things like that from a redemptive purpose rather than just a critical purpose. You know what I'm saying? And we've got to do that with our neighbors, our neighborhood. We got to start loving our job. Now listen, I did experience that when I was a brand new Christian. When I got out of the service, my goal in life was to go to every rock festival. That was it. I was well on my way to accomplishing my purpose in life. I went to all of them. I was really into that. It was just the biggest party in town. That was my life. I was going to do this the rest of my life. And then when I met the Lord, I understood I have to get a legal job. Got to do something. What can I do? And so I was studying Jesus night and day. I was so infatuated with God. I said, a carpenter. That's what Jesus was. That has to be the greatest job in the world. I'm going to be a carpenter. I went out and got a job as a carpenter's helper. You cannot believe the drudgery. You cannot believe how bad that job is. How hard, how hot it can get, and how cold it can get, and how, you just can't believe. And then one day, as 4 of us that were young Christians on this one crew, and we all resolved, said, okay, from now on, we're going to build these houses as if Jesus is going to live in them. Because it said he is. He says, as you do unto the least of his little ones, you're doing it for him. So even if they're the least of the Lord's people, we're building this house as if he's going to live in it. We're going to do it with all of our heart. And at that time, I hated this job. It was not long at all before I didn't want to go home at 5 o'clock. And I wasn't married at the time, didn't have a family, but I would go home at night and dream about work the next day. Couldn't wait to get back into it. I can't tell you how I started loving being a carpenter. I promise you, I don't care what you do, your job can be that if you do what you're supposed to do, turn it into worship. I remember asking the Lord one time, why would you make Paul the apostle make tents? Such a waste. All this revelation to you, what he could have been doing, and you've got him making tents? You know what the Lord said? He said, if Paul had not been willing to do that, I could not have trusted him with all the revelation. He said, you've got to learn to turn your drudgery into worship. If you're going to have me trust you, you're going to be connected, you're going to be moored to the practical. I believe he was making those tents as if the Lord was going to live in them. It's going to be the next tabernacle of David. It's going to be the... And you turn it into worship, and it's different. And I think that's a lot of what you were hitting on with the offering thing. So many people are so messed up in their perception of what this life is. But listen, one thing he also told me, he said, if I stayed in his will, it would be the most enjoyable life I could ever have. It may start drudgery, you turn it into worship. And it'll become the most fulfilling thing. Now, I did experience that. And but we've got to do that with everything. And we start carrying this around, we're going to be different. And we're going to start standing out the way we're supposed to. The way we're supposed to. Is a light in the city. And now, I want to finish with this one thing. You guys know Brad McClendon? Some of you do. He used to be one of our pastors, and I was just with him a couple of weeks ago. He had this incredible revelation I'm going to share with you. It was an open vision. He said the Lord was sitting on his throne and all of his leaders were gathered in front of him. And he said the Lord was trying to teach them about himself. He said he doesn't know why, but the Lord gave him this number and he showed him that 92% of all of his leaders weren't listening to him. They were trying to look past him to see what's coming, to see the future. And the Lord, he said, only 8%. I knew why the Lord showed him that. Only 8% were really listening to the Lord. And he said only those 8% were prepared for what was coming. Now, I'm not saying we don't need to understand the times. The Lord called them hypocrites who didn't understand the times. But I tell you, we've got a problem with people more focused on what's coming than on what is going to get them through what is coming. And we're not going to just get through these times. They're going to be the times of our life if we're in his will. One little principle, Paul said in Acts 14:22, through many tribulations will we enter the kingdom of God. Remember that? So in every tribulation or every trial, there's a gateway to the kingdom. Every trial in your life right now has a doorway to the kingdom. Do you see the door? You start seeing that. You learn that one lesson and learn anything coming your way. If it's a big trial, there's a big door there. And you start entering the kingdom, you're really going to be able to do what James said, count it all joy when you encounter various trials. You're going to look at every trial coming your way, another big victory. Another big opportunity. We all want victories in our life, but you know you cannot have a victory without a battle. Without a battle. I can get all of you to raise your hand just by saying, how many of you have a trial in your life right now? Everybody does. It's part of our job. But our job is not just to endure that, but it's to get the victory. Find the door. Find the door. We got to start doing that. And I'm saving a whole lot. I'm going to dig down on some of the more practical aspects of this tonight. But I want to pray for you. Lord, I just thank you for so much hunger as I feel here in this room and in this place, this gathering. Those who are after you with such pursuit to sit 10 days of this, and it feels like they want more. Lord, just thank you for this hunger. Lord, I think it's one of the greatest gifts we could have is hunger for you. Lord, I ask you for every one of these, every single one. Lord, that you would satisfy their desires. Satisfy their desires. But Lord, I ask you, open the eyes of their heart. Open their spiritual eyes so they can see reality and see truth. So they can see what's really going on. So even if an army comes against them, their eyes will be seeing your army that is with them, that is greater. Lord, I ask you to open the eyes of our heart. Lord, I ask you to give us prophetic dreams, visions. But Lord, open our eyes so that what we're seeing with them is more real than anything we're seeing with our natural eyes. Lord, give us your eyes to see with. Give us your heart to understand with. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for this morning.